There are paintings that hang politely on walls. And then there are paintings that warn you. This one does not whisper. It screams without sound. You do not look at Guernica. Guernica looks back at you and asks what you did while the lights went out. Welcome to Art Happens, the divine mess of art history, presented by J Squared Atelier. I'm James William Moore, your chaotic docent through art history, and this is Masterpiece Moment, where we take one artwork, one rupture, one cultural detonation, and hold it up to the light until it tells the truth. Today, Pablo Picasso's Guernica, a painting so massive, so fractured, so relentless, it stopped being just an image and became an alarm. Because when civilians are caught inside violence, war does not just kill bodies, it rearranges what a human being even looks like. Let's start where this starts. Not in a museum, definitely not in a textbook, not in some tiny chapter called modern art, put quotes around that. It starts with an attack. In 1937, during the Spanish Civil War, the town of Guernica was bombed. Civilians were caught in that violence. Homes, streets, bodies, panic, fire, and Picasso responded. But here's the thing. He does not paint this like a journalist. He does not paint a neat scene with labeled victims and readable chronology. He does not give us a newspaper illustration in oil. He paints the afterimage, the psychic x-ray, the internal detonation. Because there are some events where language becomes too clean, tragedy is too polished, attack is too administrative, conflict sounds like a bad panel discussion, and you know the ones I'm talking about. So Picasso builds another kind of document, not facts and figures, fragments, symbols, mouths open past speech. Bodies turned into splinters of themselves, a black and white scream that refuses to become history in the past tense. And that is part of why this painting still works. It's not telling you what happened in a tidy sequence. It is telling you what it felt like for reality itself to stop holding together. Now, let's talk about size. Because size matters. Guernica is huge. Not pretty big. Not, larger than expected. Huge. Wall-sized. Stage-sized. Public-sized. And that matters because Picasso understood something brutal. If the violence is massive, the response cannot be small. If civilians are flattened into the language of collateral, then the painting has to become something that refuses reduction. A billboard, a warning, a confrontation. Scale turns viewing into a moral event. You cannot skim this painting. You cannot glance and move on. You cannot scroll past Guernica. You stand in front of it, and it takes up enough space to make your body part of the equation. That is strategic. Because once your body has to answer the size of the work, you are no longer just a spectator. You are implicated witness. The painting does not politely request attention. It corners attention. It says, look, do not flinch. Do not aestheticize this too quickly. Do not confuse mastery with comfort. Now, let's get into the image itself. Because Guernica does not give you one clear narrative path. It gives you a system, a storm of symbols, a visual language assembled out of shards. There is a horse, mouth open, body pierced, pain turned into jagged structure. There is a bull, looming, watchful, unreadable. One of those forms that feels stable and unstable at the same time. There is the mother with her dead child. And good Lord, that image alone is enough to split the room open. Her face throws upward like a broken bell. And that is the thing about this painting. The symbols are familiar enough that you feel them immediately, but unstable enough that they do not settle into one neat lesson, and they should not, because war does not resolve itself into tidy symbolism. War leaves residue. War leaves repetition. War leaves the same nightmare showing up in different shapes. Then there is the light, that hard, exposed, almost mechanical light. It can feel like an interrogation lamp, like the eye of a camera, like history itself refusing soft focus. Nothing in Guernica is allowed the luxury of gentle illumination. Everything is exposed. Everything is cornered. Everything is caught in the glare. And that is part of the cruelty of this painting. Picasso is not giving us symbolic poetry that comforts. He is giving us symbols that cut. Here's the central move in Guernica: fragmentation. Bodies do not sit naturally in space. They twist, they buckle, they overleap, they break apart into angles, blades, splinters, masks. The whole thing feels shattered and reassembled wrong. And yes, that is the point. Because war is not only about death, war is about distortion. It distorts homes into rubble, streets into traps, citizens into targets, children into statistics, grief into background noise. In Guernica, the style becomes the argument. The jaggedness is not just Picasso being Picasso. It is a visual translation of a world that can no longer hold its shape. That matters. Because too often, people talk about modernist distortion as if it's a decorative invention. But here, distortion is ethical. Distortion is witness. Distortion says, after violence, the human figure does not come back to us whole. The painting understands that trauma is not neat. It does not line up. It does not sit still for portraiture. It does not preserve anatomy out of politeness. It tears the image open. And once you see that, the painting stops being complicated in an academic way and starts becoming devastating in a bodily one. You feel it before you fully parse it. That is why it lands. And then, of course, there is the palette. Black, white, gray. No seductive color. No heroic red. No lush blue. No golden rescue. Nothing softens the blow. It feels like newsprint, like black and white photography, like an archive, like evidence. That is such a smart move. Because Guernica does not need color to intensify emotion. It uses the absence of color to make the emotion harsher, cleaner, more exposed, less escapable. Color can seduce. This painting does not want you seduced. It wants to corner you with contrast. And in a world already full of propaganda, that monochrome language does something important. It feels record-like, even though it is expressive. It feels like testimony, like the image belongs in the same moral category as documentation. Not because it is literal, but because it is undeniable. Now, here is where Guernica becomes more than a single painting. It reproduces. It gets photographed, printed, shared, discussed, taught, quoted, carried. And once an image can travel like that, it becomes bigger than the room it hangs in. Reproduction becomes power, because a painting that can be reproduced can keep sounding its alarm across borders, into classrooms, into books, into protests, into memory. Now, yes, images can absolutely be used as propaganda, but Guernica does something different. It is not saying, believe this leader, or join this faction, or celebrate this victory. It is not propaganda of triumph. It is propaganda of witness. It says, remember the civilians. Remember what violence does when it lands on ordinary lives. Remember the human cost that political language always tries to tidy up. That is why the painting became a siren. Not because it explains everything, but because it refuses forgetting. So why does it still hit? Because it is not trapped inside one uniform, one bomb, one decade, one battlefield. It is not dated by a specific machine. It is dated by the oldest horror on Earth, human suffering in a public place. Guernica is not really a painting of one battle. It is a painting of the realities civilians keep inheriting. That is why the forms still work. The fractured faces, the screaming mouths, the broken bodies, the panic, the impossible angles. They read as a universal language of harm. That is the unsettling part. The painting does not age because the pattern does not. Stand in front of Guernica long enough and you'll realize something. There is no hero here. No victorious pose, no triumphant rescue, no clean moral center. Only aftermath. Only rupture. Only the demand that you acknowledge what has happened. And that may be the painting's most devastating refusal. It does not give you catharsis. It gives you responsibility. Because a siren does not explain. A siren does not debate. A siren says something is happening. Pay attention. And Guernica, nearly a century later, is still doing that. Guernica does not show war. It shows what war does to the human shape. And once you've seen that shape, you do not forget it. Thanks for spending this time with me on Art Happens, the Divine Mess of Art History, presented by J Squared Atelier. I'm James William Moore, and thank you for joining me today as we go through this little bit of art history. Until next time, keep looking longer than you think you should, because the truth in art, it usually arrives right after the first moment you want to turn away. On a side note, if you've enjoyed listening to my take on art, art history, and the creative process, perhaps you'd like to see the art I create. Madame B, my homage to the mystical world of tarot and fortune-telling, is loading up her crystal ball and hitting the road. The Cloverdale Arts Alliance will be hosting my collection, Madame B's Tarot Readings, from May 16th through July 12th. Join us for an artist reception on Saturday, May 16th at 5:30, and on Sunday, May 17th at 11 a.m., you can be part of a live recording of Lattes and Art when I will be interviewed by Will McCoy, Gallery Director of Cloverdale Arts Alliance. And if you do visit, please introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you and hear your views on how I spend my creative time.